Continuing my reading of The Mystery of the Broken Mirror, The Making of the Mirror, chapter 3, part 2. A tentative definition of creation might be made along the lines of: creation is the mystery and creativity of God made visible. The outworking and visible and evolving form which expresses and communicates the inner being of God. If we accept that sort of definition, there's something mirror-like about creation. Just as Alfie, my friend Alfie, and the writer of the psalm were able to look at the stars and see God shining back at them, so to the eyes of faith, the whole of creation is a sort of a mirror in which God's own image can be seen reflected. That word image expresses a very, very important idea. It's there in the first chapter of the book of Genesis. Elsewhere in the Old Testament, it's used to mean the carved or created images that people made of their gods. But in Genesis, it's used in a particular way. God said, "Let us make humankind in our image." So God created humankind in his own image. Male and female, he created them. If the whole of creation is likened to a mirror in which God's image is seen reflected, then the biblical tradition argues that this is particularly true of the human race. There is something special about humanity which reflects the image of God. The problem with the mirror analogy, however, it's just an analogy, is that it's a very passive idea of an image. When I move my right hand, my reflection in the mirror moves his corresponding hand. But the reflection has no independent existence. It's merely a trick of light. Though I may see my reflection, I cannot step beyond the mirror and encounter it in the way in which I encounter my wife, or in the way God seems to encounter me. In short, I can only have a relationship with something or someone else who has an existence independent from me. I interact with my fellow human beings, with my dog, or with the fly I'm trying to desperately swat in the kitchen, in a different way from the way in which I relate to my shadow or my reflection in the mirror. One of the questions that human beings ask again and again when they think of God is, why does God let this happen? Is God really in control? Is God in control of creation? Or does creation have a life of its own? Some years ago, I was fortunate enough to visit Hollywood and witness some of the special effects which the filmmakers are able to use. I witnessed such lifelike wonders as simulated earthquakes, blazing fires, torrential rain and floods, and collapsing bridges. Thankfully, all these special effects were carefully planned and controlled. Someone, somewhere, was sitting in a console, pressing buttons which set the events in motion. Is that our picture of God? Is creation like some cosmic special effects show, where God plans the program in advance and presses all the buttons? If so, where does that place us? Are we simply God's toys? Part of the big game which God is playing? Puppets dancing only when God pulls our strings? If we answer yes to those questions, then our picture of God is drawn in certain ways. God either has to become sort of impersonal life force or energy, somewhat akin to electricity, which simply causes everything to happen irrespective of consequences. Or God becomes some sort of despotic and unfeeling personality, content to play around with creation for his personal amusement. I'd like to suggest that neither of these come anywhere near the understanding of God in the Christian tradition. I recently asked a group of young people the question, why do you think God created us? What were we made for? The answer of one girl sticks in my mind even today because it is at once so childishly simple and yet so profound. She said, because God was lonely. The fact that every human being has experience of loneliness suggests that there is an inbuilt human desire for relationship, to know and to be known, to love and to be loved. Indeed, it could be argued that we are only able to discover ourselves truly in relationship to others. Good relationships enable us to become more fully what we already are. There is really no such thing as an individual person. We are always part of the wider creation and constantly in relationship with it. If this aspect of human existence is part of the divine image within us, it can help us to understand the nature of God and the purpose of creation. God is no more individual than we are. If God is personal, then a significant part of what it means to be personal has to do with living in a relationship. Put simply, when Christians use the slogan, God is love, they're talking as much about God in relationship as about the inner character of God. Whatever we mean by that word love, one thing is clear: love has no meaning outside of a relationship. To stand up and say, I love, is an unfinished statement. There has to be an object of love for it to have any meaning. In that sense, God cannot be lonely in the way in which we experience loneliness, because existence in relationship must be right at the heart of the divine being. But it does point us to why we can't conceive ever of an automatic, controlled universe. For it's impossible to have a relationship of love with what is controlled. I cannot force anyone to love me. It's a free response, arising out of a growing relationship. God created a universe which would be able to interact and respond to its creator. What life forms may exist in other solar systems and galaxies which may already be worshipping the creator, we can only speculate upon. But what we do know is that on this planet we call Earth, we human beings, along with the rest of creation, have been worshipping the Creator throughout our brief history. We know too that part of what makes us human is this capacity to love and the need to be loved and the inbuilt freedom which makes love truly possible. Creation, you see, is the greatest risk of all. The mirror comes into being. God's very life and being are reflected in creation. But this image is given a life and a freedom which will enable it to interact freely with the source of life. Like every parent who wishes his or her child to develop into full maturity, God's love had to let go. Creation is therefore a great divine letting go, the bringing into being of something other than God, so that God's love could truly have an object, and so that what was created could in its turn respond in love to the Creator. You could say that God risked everything to begin a love affair, which still continues today and still waits to be fulfilled.